Hello everyone and you're welcome. If you're here, that means you're trying to learn CLO 3D, and let's go ahead and begin. So this is a fashion designer's software, and it allows you to create, clothes, fabrics, designs, and it gives you access to models, and you can use those models to create those fabric. And not just creating fabrics and materials, you can pose these 3D models called avatars, and it gives you an interface where you can actually create virtual fabric design using stitching, sewing, merging, playing with the UVs, and basically it gives you an efficient way to work with a software and experiment, make mistakes, and have fun intuitively in the process without wasting real life fabric. Basically, you can experiment and see what you can create with this software. It has a slight steep learning curve, but at the same time, like any other software, with practice and dedication, you're actually going to get started much more smoother. So it's a paid software, but if you're a student, you can have access to a discount. If you're a student, I believe they have a way of finding out if you're a student. You can use your student ID, and then they can be able to give you a discount. There's also an individual plan, so just watch out for it. Now, I don't know if the company gives a special discount whenever there are special occasions like a new year or something like that, or when they're doing sales. I don't know if they have sales, but if you want to find out, make sure you subscribe to them and you'll be good. So the first thing to do is to download the software. And to get a copy of the software, just click on the download icon. This will give you an option and open up, and you can actually see the products. You can choose your operating system and also check your system requirements. Now, this software is processor intensive, and it's actually advisable to have a system that has a very powerful GPU. Now, this is coming out in Chinese. I'll just click on translate so I can have that in English, and you can actually see the system requirements. So the good thing is the minimum specification you can see is an 8 GB memory, an Intel i5, and NVIDIA. So NVIDIA is an awesome company. I believe they're one of the leading industry on graphics processing. So basically, if you have a gaming system that's very good, you'll actually be good to go. Now that's the minimum requirement. And also a 3-button mouse is awesome, but you can use the keyboard shortcuts to have access to it. And these are the recommended settings. So it needs 32 GB or more, and still you're seeing the high-end NVIDIA cards. And also it needs an internet connection to download access, and then also to authenticate your user. So basically, that's how those are the requirements. And yeah, that's it. So once you have downloaded that software, you've downloaded it for your specific operating system. I believe it's around 1.85 GB or so. So once you've downloaded that, just double click on it, and once it's done, you should have an icon. So let's go ahead and click on Windows, and you can see this is the CLO standalone online authentication. So that's how it actually writes the name. It's super weird, but that's the name that comes out. So, and the version is CLO 7.2. So like I said, you need an active internet connection. This is just to authenticate and verify the user. So I'll just go ahead and impute my username, and whoops, and let's just do that. Now, because this is a demo version, you can actually have access to a trial version, and you can use the software for at least 30 days. Now, I believe 30 days is more than enough for you to have a glimpse and have understand how the software works, at least to even have a few projects in 30 days. So let's go ahead and just click OK. And basically that's it. So let's go ahead and close this, and yours will have the 3D and 2D split views like that. So that's how the default is. I just kind of changed the view so that I could have some nice space to work with. So this is going to be your 3D workspace, and basically this is where you're going to pose an avatar Basically an avatar is a 3D character, and you can actually pose, create seams, create sews, stitches in 3D directly on a model. This is a companion 2D pattern window, and on the 2D pattern window you pretty much do the same thing you do on the 3D window, but this time around you have access to your two-dimensional axis. So there's no 3D going on here, but it has access to some 2D tools and sewing tools. And then right here on the left side of the screen, you'll have access to your 3D view. So the first thing and the most prominent thing is to kind of like get a hold of the interface so that you actually see what's going on right here. Now there are different options and modes when you're operating and working with CLO 3D. Right here we're on the simulation mode, and what the simulation mode does is to allow you to create simulations, and you can actually see your garments in live action. So here, if I click on this drop down arrow, you can actually see the modes we have here. So there's simulation, which is the mode we have here, animation, print layout, emulator, modular, and UV editor. A UV editor is a 2D coordinate system that maps out a 3D view into an X and Y flat coordinate. So here we can actually see our object browser, and this will give us access to any objects we have in the scene. And right here as well, underneath the object browser, you can actually see the property editor. So basically anything you select would have at least a few properties you can change. For instance, we can change things like the name, and then see other access to the kinds of materials this is using. So you can actually see here is set to a physically based render. That's what PBR means. And we can also select a substance. Substance is a program by Adobe, and these softwares allows you to create a procedural material that reacts to any kind of lighting condition, and it's also parametric. It means it's non-destructive, and basically that's what a PBR material is, and this is what a substance material is. So let's go back to the top. So here you can actually see this is your user account. You'll find your username here, and this is your cloud. So basically you can share your designs via a closet actually. So, and over here we can actually see the standard menus. So you have your file menu, edit, your 3D garment and 2D garment menus, your sewing menus, and you can actually see very important shortcut keys. Your material, basically you have a texture and also some other objects like a button, zipper, your pipings, blinding, top stitch, seams, and taping. You have the editor, your avatar, render, display, the preferences. Now the preferences is an awesome place to kind of like make some nice changes and settings. And here you also have settings. You can use things like change the language. And let's go ahead and jump into the user settings. So I'll click on user settings, and this is where you can make some little changes to the program, and this is where you can have access to things like your units. So if I go over here to shortcuts, we can see the shortcuts, and you can open them up and see the shortcuts that are built into the program. And this is where you can change things like the UI. Now for the unit system, you can set it to inches or centimeters. I think centimeters and inches are the fairly most common ones, especially for SI or System International units. So I'm just going to set this to inch. And then the currency unit, you can set it to any currency unit for your country. I'm just going to leave this at USD, but you can change this to any other currency unit you want to use. So here we have other things like the mesh types. So setting this to a triangle is going to set the mesh for any objects import or the avatar meshes to triangles, which graphic processors love working with triangles. Or you can set it to quads in case you have a model that has been created that uses a face quad structure. So basically that's it. Just for the UI, I changed this to inches, and what you can actually find out is after a while you can find out where you want to basically place your windows right here and these objects. So the most prominent and important thing to do is to load in an avatar. So, and each time you see this N, it means you haven't have access to these, and there are new updates or new things that you need to explore over there. So here we can actually see this is our download bar, and here is an option for you to add a custom folder. So for instance, if you have things like materials, reference images, you have some notes, or you want to store your custom files, or you want to store your documents, or have CLO 3D have access to a specific custom content folder, this is where you can do that. Let's go ahead and click on that, and it's going to ask you to look for where you want to store that. So I have a folder, an empty folder called my projects. I called it MLX projects. So I'll just select this folder, and CLO is going to have access to that folder and store content in that folder. So first we can actually see we have the garment, we have the avatar. So if you click on the avatar and double click on that, you can actually see the avatars we have in here. So let's either click this drop down or go over here and click the female volume 2, and you can actually see the character types we have right here. Now you can select either the female avatar, or you can select the male avatar. This is the version 2, but anyone you want to select, that's totally fine. It comes default, I believe, with FV_2 Maya. I believe that's the default one, but you can click and download any of these so you can have access to them. And to use them, just left click and drag and drop in your scene. So you can actually have an avatar, and it's going to load this avatar, and it depends on how your system is, and we have this avatar in the scene. So to move or pan around this avatar, just click and hold the middle mouse button, and you can pan this avatar. You can grab and hold this avatar and kind of like pan it to the left, right, and grab it to the up and the down as well. And we can actually zoom in and out by pulling the scroll wheel down, grabbing and panning, and pushing the scroll wheel up to zoom out. So also this is for the 3D view. To rotate, if you hold the right click, you can actually drag this to rotate the object, the avatar. You can just rotate like this. So I can zoom out, right click to rotate. If I drag that to the left and right, we can like orbit around this character. And if I drag this from bottom to top, we can actually see we can zoom, we can kind of like look and orbit around this character vertically as well. So that's how we can use these options. Pretty straightforward. Right click to rotate, middle mouse button to kind of like pan, grab and pan the object, and then the left click is used to select specific sections of an object. If you're also close to an object, you can right click, for instance, on these shoes, and you can click on hide avatar. This is going to hide the avatar. Let's bring the avatar back by pressing Control Z to actually undo that. So what we can do over here is to click deactivate and hide on any of these objects. I'll just click deactivate/hide just to hide the shoes. So basically that's to show you how to hide these shoes. And I think you can do things like change heels to down. So this character's foot is actually down. Right, and awesome. And we can do things like select the entire avatar. I believe it's Control A, or you could just click and hold down right click and say select all faces, and you can actually select the whole thing basically like that. And that's for the 3D view. The 2D view is no much different. The same orbit tool works for the 2D view and the 3D view as well. So we can pan, zoom in and out using the mouse scroll wheel, and we can grab and pan by holding the middle mouse button. Now because this is a 2D view, if we right click like we're in the 3D view to rotate, we cannot rotate because this is a 2D view. Right, so that brings us to the quick tools on how to rotate, pan, and we can actually see our context sensitive menus. So over here on the left we have our history tool. So in case we've actually changed some things, we can always go back in history and go back to our steps. For instance, if we wanted to bring the shoes back, we'll go over here, and if we wanted to go where we are currently, we'll just click over here to get back to the state. We can also save history states For instance, if we like what we did here, we just click on this state, and this is going to save the state we are in, and we can jump between states. So this is our 3D state. We can, we can rename this state, and I can just call it I hid the shoes, like so for this state. So that's what I did for that state. I hid the shoes. So maybe if you change the hair, you can say I changed the hair. If you created a new stitch on the object, I created a new stitch on the object. So basically that's how you can drag in an avatar by going to the library, where you can have access to fabrics, textures, materials. You can have things like trims, and you can have your modular library like here. So the modular library is going to contain sub-components. For instance, you can do things like create the design for the bra, or for the panties. You can design a waistband. You can design different sections of the fabric, and you can drag these and have these as modular assets. Your object browser is going to contain all the objects you have in your scene, and you can quickly move over them, and then like I explained earlier, you can actually see your properties over here. So what else haven't we covered? Yeah, we're going to look at these shortcut menus, but if you want to change the GPU or processor settings, you see this arrow right here. We can actually use this to change those properties like so. So if I left click and hold this, you can set it to fast GPU, and this is going to be using our GPU. You can actually see the preset we're using right here. It's called fast GPU, and this is very good, especially when you have NVIDIA or AMD or any of the graphics built in dedicated graphics processor. You can actually use that to take advantage of your process. You can set this back to normal, and this would actually work well with your CPU, and it's going to show you the CPUs in use. And this is very good when you're working and creating layers in your project. So you can do things like add a separate kind of fabric here. You can add a texture, and you can also toggle things on and off, and you can add points right here. So these options right here are going to be your sewing, mending, your mesh creation options, and we also have various options right here that contain things like measurement. So like I said, you're not going to be using everything. There are some tools that you find you're going to be using the most, and some tools you're not going to be using that much. And what you can easily do is each time you hover any menu, it's actually going to give you a hint that shows you what that menu actually does. So that's going to be for the UI, and I haven't covered everything about UI, but that's pretty much how the UI works. And like I said, we have various modes, and each mode you change is going to give you a context sensitive menu. So we are on the animation mode, and we can see we have the timeline at the bottom. Basically, you can make changes like rotate your character and kind of like save that animation, and you can use that to present that to a client or your project team. So let's go ahead and see the print layout. The print layout is going to also have its own context sensitive menus. You can actually see the menus on the left and the right have changed, and basically this is going to allow you to have more of these options. So let's go ahead and set this to the emulator. So this is going to give you a little warning that you might actually lose some things, and basically this works with a fabric kit, and you actually use this to prepare a kit, and gives you a step-by-step process to do this. And each of these steps, if you don't understand what they fully do, you can click on tutorial to actually get a one-on-one hands-on view to see what it does. So let's get back to the modular view. And like I explained, the modular view is going to allow you to use pre-built kits or materials or assets you imported, and then have them over here, and you can use a modular block setup to create that. And let's go ahead and see the UV editor. This is going to allow you to edit the 2D coordinates that have been wrapped around a 3D object. So if you're used to a software like Blender, Maya, 3ds Max, Modo, Cinema 4D, the UV editor should not be a new concept. It's basically a two-dimensional representation of a 3D object in your scene. And I'm just going to go back to simulation mode, and we actually got a warning that if we haven't made any saves, we might lose access to our saves. Now, if you find out these menus are kind of like, small, what you can do is just drag out these sections so you can change or, increase the size of your user interface. So I'll go ahead and drag in Naomi back to the scene. And like I said, if we quickly want to, kind of like bring this back, we can use the history tool to click this back to our hit shoes. So loading a hit restate, and let's proceed to load out Naomi, and let's click OK. And what this is going to do is going to bring back our camera states, our zoom levels, and then bring back our character to the point we left her without the shoes. So it's actually quite awesome to use your history states. And also, first thing we also need to do is to make sure that we can save our project and make sure you don't lose anything. So I'm just going to click on save project and click on proceed, and I'll go to my own project folder. So I'm going to go to my new volume, 3D fashion, MLX projects, and we're just going to say Naomi underscore test and hit the enter button just so that we have saved our project and we don't lose any changes we have. And you can also create your incremental saves. Now CLO3D also gives you an online option to save your projects. You can always sign into the CLO library and you can have access to your projects online. But basically what I like doing is to use a cloud space to store my own personal projects. So that's it for the interface. There are lots and lots of other tools that are hidden, but just for now, this is a basic interface setup. And next, what we're going to do is to create a nice material for this character and see how we can simulate that material. Now, there's some handy little tips and tricks I wanted to give you, especially when you want to quickly turn your character around or check your character from the side view or check the back of your character. If you want to do that, just press the 2. It's going to set you to the front view. 4 is going to set you to the side view. 6 is going to set you to a flipped side view. And then 8 is going to give you access to a back view. So these are just the shortcut keys you can press with your keyboard. Now there's some built-in garments. If you click on the garments, just double click on that, you can actually see we have some female t-shirts, a male t-shirt. We also have a female t-shirt version with a circular neck, and then we also have that male t-shirt. These are all .z packs. So basically these are sets that contain the fabric material. And also another thing I'd like to show you, if we get back to this garment, is that this item right here isn't actually downloaded on your system. So if you want this design, all you have to do is just click on that, and this is going to download this to your work area and your workspace, and it's going to be persistent. Basically that means next time you load this, you'll have access to it. If I open up this avatar and click the drop down and click the female, you can actually notice these are also in my persistent workspace. So you might actually find that download section right there. That means it's not available. So you can also find other poses you want, for example for the female version too. So you can download these poses and have them in your scene in case you want to pose the character. So that's just by the way, I just wanted to point that out for you. So with that, what we're going to do is to create a nice basic fabric for this character, nothing too complex, because again, this is just for beginners. We don't want to do anything super crazy and complex right here. So to start working with the garments, let's just go over to click on the garment. I'll double click on this, and this is a default female garment that was created for this avatar. So let's just double click that and see. It's telling us the file can be damaged. I'll just click on I want to proceed, and this should maintain. Let's click open in size from a garment file, or we could just leave the first one on, it's not a problem. So here we can actually see something going on here. So what is going on right here? So what we can see right now in our garment view, which is our 3D view, is that we can actually see a garment right here that has been like stitched, created, and we can actually see the parts that have been, kind of like created for this character. and we can actually see that it's getting ready to be stitched. Also on our 2D view, and remember we can always have a maximized view on this, and we can also switch this to our 2D view only, so we can actually see how that garment is actually placed on this. So this is the front, the back, and these are the sides for the shoulders, and this is a left and right section for each of these garments. This is a built-in garment, and there are tools that we can actually use to build this garment. So I'll just go over to the split view and kind of like zoom in a little bit so we can see what we're working with. And I'll just zoom out on this character. So that's how you can quickly drag in a built-in garment. And if I kind of like click on that, we can actually see that it's actually been kind of like stitched to this character. So what we can do from here is to look at these points, kind of like move them around, and kind of like see how this is actually working on this character. So that's the neck right here. If we look at this, we can just zoom in and go over this neck, and we can actually see that object on the 2D window. Right, so this is the 2D window, that's the left side, this is the right side, but actually it's actually our left. So if this is the right for the character, that's the left, and if this is the left for the character, that's our right. So but I'll just use the characters our own reference view, and I'll just call this left and call this right, like so. We can also see the right section. So basically anytime you select an object on this, we can actually switch it over from here. Now this is a default fabric. We can add new fabric materials to this object, and we just pinch and move this around and see this view. So this is what the simulation view means, right? The simulation views allow you to see the fabric in real time, and you can actually do things like create simulations and kind of like move things around. Basically that's what the simulation view does. And again, if you want some space, you can quickly switch over to the 3D window, and you can actually see what you're working with right here. So right now, a core and key concept I want you to take away from this is that you can actually create these pattern designs right here directly on your 2D window, and then when you're done, you can actually see how that pattern works on your character on the 3D window. So again, that's the core technique. Or you could just directly create the fabric on the character in the 3D window, and you can actually see that output. So either way, you can walk from left to right, from the garment window to the 2D pattern window, and that's also going to be fine as well. There's no written law or rule on stone on. And now don't remember that our history states are there to help us. If we go back to our old state, we actually notice that these lines show you where the sew lines are, and these lines are going to show you where this object is going to stitch. Basically, that's where this fabric is going to stitch on these objects. So the red lines and these green lines are just showing you this object is going to be stitched on this side. And if you want to see that in action, just press the space bar, and this would actually simulate that on the object. So very, very important. You can always go back to your history states, and then once you're happy with something, you can just press spacebar to run the simulation. Also, that's why this is called the simulation mode, because this is where we can create a simulation of and see how your fabric is doing on this object. You can actually see that. You can pull and kind of like stretch these points just to see how that's working on your object. So now that we've been using the software and we've seen the interface a little bit, sometimes you might want to have a little more space to work with. For instance, you can actually see we have our model, but we're not really taking advantage of the scene. We can actually zoom out and zoom in, but we just want a little bit of extra space to work with. So this is what you can do. If you notice over here, for instance, if you look at the library, you notice an arrow that is pointing left. It's just telling you, hey, I want to dock this view. So if you click on that, the library is going to be docked on the left. To bring it back, just click on the library and you have it back. And let's go ahead and dock the history states as well. And we can even dock the modular folder. Now you can actually see that we have more extra space to work with, and we can always bring back these menus if we want, just so we can have some nice space. And if we move the mouse or the cursor in between the garment view and the 2D view, you can actually notice this arrow that it's kind of like pointing left and right, that's a divider. So we can just use this to drag this so you can have more of a view as well. So each of these can be docked. We can even dock the object browser and dock the property editor as well, just so we can have more space to work with. You can see we can do that. Another thing I also like to show you is that these menu icons, you can actually dock them to the top, just like in traditional applications and softwares. So we can actually do that. And in fact, let's go ahead and customize how we can place these menu bars, these toolbars, to the top of the view. So to do that, let's go to settings and let's go under user settings. Let's just click on that, and it's going to open up this menu. Let's click on the user interface, and on the user interface under the mode and toolbar, what we're going to do is to see the toolbar, 3D toolbar. It says left. That means this 3D toolbar is docked to the left side. We can just dock this to the top if we want. And for the 2D toolbar as well, we could also dock this to the top like so. And another pro tip is that don't forget to click on this slider and drag down for more options. You can actually see we have more options we can use to customize our project. So with that, let's just go ahead and close this, and you can actually see our toolbars are docked at the top, which again gives us extra space to work with. So another thing that's frustrating when you're beginning is that each time you can't find these menus, it becomes frustrating. Don't worry, all you need to do is to click on the library. For instance, if you're done with it, just click this back arrow. That means you want to kind of like collapse and dock that view. And with that, you can see we have a nice interface we can actually work with that's a bit free, a little spacey, and we can look at our designs and see how our designs actually work. To undo any of these changes, you can just click on Ctrl Z to undo, and to run the simulation, you can just click the space bar to run a simulation like so, because we are on the simulation mode. Right. So let's go ahead and start seeing how we can sew a piece of fabric, and say maybe we want to create a skirt or trouser, or want to create some nice like arm bracelets for this character. Let's go ahead and see how we can do that right now. So let's look at the tools we are going to be using to create patterns, to create textures and to add stitches. So here, if we look at the 2D pattern window, we can actually see a set of rows at the top and then a set of rows at the bottom right here. So here we can actually see we have measurement tools, we have a text tool here, and to edit annotations and add some text here. And basically these tools at the top row of our 2D pattern window, they're actually used for creating and editing patterns. Basically, that's what we have on the top row. So, and at the bottom row right here, we can actually see these are sets of tools that have been divided by a slight partition. So each of these, like the first set of these tools, I'll just call them set 1. Now these are used for creating sewing lines. So if you want to think about you're like sewing something and you want to create your sewing lines, these are the top tools to use. So the first set is going to be used for creating your sewing lines. Now the next set of tools right here I've used to actually create your textures. So basically you can add a 2D texture to these tools, and you can also do things like do your seams, and you can actually do your steam taping. Basically, like when you're ironing, you can actually use your steam taping on the fabric. And these third set of tools, they're actually used for stitching, right? So you can add your top stitch, you can use a segment top stitch, and you can also use some puckering and more tools here. You can add a layer and sub layer, and you can also use a fill to fill out your areas. So basically this is your 2D tools, and you use them in the 2D window like I just mentioned to create your patterns. You can edit those patterns, you can add sewing lines, you can add textures, and you can also add your top stitches. And again, there are a lot of keyboard shortcuts. Each time you actually see access to any of these tools, you actually notice that there are keyboard shortcuts. You can find out what keyboard shortcut you're using by just leaving the mouse over it, and you'll see this tooltip that will tell you. For instance, if we want to add a transform pattern, the keyboard shortcut is A, and if we wanted to do something like maybe edit our sewing, we'll actually use B. But my good tip is for a beginner is that just to try and get used to the tools, because you won't be using most of these tools. They are tools that you're going to use most of the time. They are the commonly used tools, and then there are tools that you rarely use. So use the program for like a week, a month. As take your time to use the program. Always, try to find out where things are. Don't be too concerned about shortcuts, and eventually by the time you are beginning to get proficient with using the program, you'll begin to use those shortcuts, and you can start, trying to get the shortcuts and using those shortcuts for the tools that you use mostly. But for right now, just try and familiarize yourself with the tools, where they are, where you can access them. You can just try and click them and actually, try to find where things are. So stay away from shortcuts initially. After you get used to it, you can start using your shortcuts. And also by pointing out where these things are, where these tools are, where the shape tool is, where the polygon line is, where's the annotation, where's the tape. By the time you just look at them, after a while, you just get used to it. So that's just my pro tip piece of advice, by the way. So let's see how we can transform or move a pattern. Now, each time you select an object, we can actually see what's happening here. So if we select this object right here, we actually see the tool here has been highlighted. It means this is the tool we're using. So this is the transform pattern tool. If I go over to the next one, which is the edit pattern, if I click on that, you can actually see we have these points, and I can actually select these Bezier points. We can see we have Bezier handles, and we can actually move these handles to edit those points like so. Right, so that's what that's doing. So I'll just undo those changes real quick, and I'll just zoom out because it's just zoom into our face like so. So that's the edit pattern tool. You can edit an edge rather, and you can actually edit these points by clicking on each of these points and kind of like editing them. Each time we select those points, we can actually see here on the garment view that we actually have this 3D gizmo that's appearing. So A is for the transform pattern tool. If we click on that, we can actually use that to transform or move a pattern. So basically we are kind of like moving this pattern to any point we want. I'll just use undo to do that. So you can do that by just clicking on any of these and just practice moving these patterns. This is the design for the back. This is for the front right here. This is for the color, and this is for the front. So if you press A, you can't even go to the 3D view and select this object. You actually notice that it's been highlighted. So what you're selecting on the 2D view is also being highlighted on the garment or the 3D view. I'm just going to call it 3D view because it's super awesome to call it a just use the 3D view. So yeah, so that's it. So if you select an object with the transform pattern tool, or simply shortcut is the letter A, and you actually select an object. So if you try to move it around, you're actually going to be kind of like transforming this object. So we have it right here. We've just transformed this object from this point to this point. We can also scale the objects by using these scale gizmos. We can remove the locative point. Basically, that's the center of this object. So take a few moments, try and practice around, press A, click on the object, and kind of like transform it. When you're done, you can always undo what you've done. And for the next tool is the edit pattern tool. So if I click on Z, this will show us the points that have created this object, and we can select each specific point and do things like dragging and moving those points to change the design, right? And it's also going to be reflected on the other side of that garment. So for instance, if I select these 2 points by left clicking and dragging, I can go to the 3D view, select this, and this X means the horizontal 2D axis. I can just drag this like so, and you can actually see it's going to update like that as well. I'll just undo that and see what we're working with. So for instance, I've made this change right here to this edge. It's a very weird change. I'm going to press the space bar to simulate that, and just to see that I've added a slight allowance to this point right here underneath the armpit area like so. So that's the change I've actually made. Let's just drag this, and I just basically made that quite slightly long, and I press the space bar to simulate that change I've made. Let's go ahead and make changes to this edge. So if we select this bottom edge right here, and we could just zoom out here, we'll actually have that showing here. And what we can do is to just drag this downwards a bit and just pull that down a bit like so. And let's do that for the back as well. So if we select this edge, I'll just left click and drag a selection, and I'll make sure this has turned into that cursor. So I'll just drag this point down, and also let's just leave it like that and press the space bar so we can simulate and see how this is appearing like so. So we can see that we can actually modify designs, and if this is looking super weird, we can just prick this part and just kind of like poke it and move it around, kind of like left click and poke that point just to drag it and see how it's going to be looking on this character. Let's poke this center and poke this one as well, just to drag this fabric and see how that's going to look on the object. So basically with these two tools, you can just see that you can start making some slight changes to the design like so. So that's for the moving, and also for the, kind of like editing a pattern tool. Editing is going to bring out these points. They are called vertices, and basically that's what editing is going to do. It's going to expose these vertices, and we can use that to kind of like create a different design. For instance, if we wanted to change this v-neck, all we need to do is to just select this point and just drag this point like so, and let's resimulate, and we can actually see what we've done here. And we actually have this like so, which is very terrible. So we could just undo what we did and press the space bar to resimulate. I think I need to undo on this window, so I'll just undo like so. Good. So we're good to go. Alright, so we have this existing shape that has been we dragged in using in the library. We went to our garment and we pulled in this female outfit and we dragged it into the scene. So let's go ahead and collapse that by clicking on the arrow. And so how do we add a new design? Basically, how was this created and how do we modify this design? Now, again, we're in our 2D pattern window. And just like I mentioned anywhere, your 2D pattern window is for creating and editing patterns, and it's this set here at the top row. We saw how we could just select with the A and select a specific pattern like so, and then we saw how we could edit a pattern by pressing Z, and you can actually know that you're in the edit mode if you actually see these vertices like so appear in your 2D window. So to edit a shape, right, if you want to create a new shape, all we need to do is to go over here and click on this box right here. So this is going to show us some polygonal kind of like shapes, not just polygons. We have rectangles, ellipse, and we also have a spiral as well. So this is an internal polygon tool, but let's focus on the this folder right here with the polygon tool. So let's click on the rectangle tool like so, and just click and drag a rectangular shape like so. It could be any shape, but I'll just drag this length right here. So what just happened right now? So we can actually see in our 3D view, if I hold down the right mouse button, right click, and I just hold down, we can actually see we have created a polygonal 3D shape in our scene right here. So this is a 3D shape, but this is a 2D shape that has its two-dimensional axes. So that's one way to create a shape. You could create a shape. Again, let's go ahead and redo that. So let's say we want to create an ellipse. Once we create it, it's waiting for us to draw that elliptical shape, and I'll just draw an ellipse like this. And if I left click to validate, we can actually see that we have drawn an ellipse, and it's trying to kind of like store that in memory, and we can see that we have drawn an ellipse in the scene. So let's go ahead and delete that. So let's press A to the select tool, and what we are actually going to do is to delete this guy and also to delete this guy. The reason why I'm deleting is because I want to show you another way to create this by specifying the size, because this is a fashion tool and you actually have measurements of your material. You want to cut your material, so you need to specify the size of your material, and to do that is fairly super simple. So let's click the polygon tool, and this time around let's click, and sorry about that guys, let me just go ahead and deselect that, select here, click and hold the box, and let's go to, sorry, this is where I'm supposed to go. I'll go to rectangle, and this time around I'm going to left click in the view. So by left clicking in the view, it's going to bring out a pop-up that shows you the width and size of the object you want to create. So let's say I have a fabric and I want to create a rectangular shape or a square shape of let's say a 6 by 2, a width of 3 and a height of 6. We can just set a 3 inches by a height of 6, and we can actually see this light material we have here. If we click OK, then it's going to create that material with a specified setting. So two ways you can quickly create materials. Let's go ahead and just look at that real quick. Let's go over the rectangle. Let's click on that polygon tool, and let's go to the ellipse. Let's click once, and then we can see we can set a diameter. So here we can set the width or the radius of this shape, and then with that we can actually create a shape. If I set a width of, let's say, 7, it is going to create this object in the scene, and we can actually see it right here. To select that, we can select this object right here, and if we want to edit our points, let's go to edit the points. I'm getting kind of repetitive here, but I guess you understand where we're coming from. So I'll select this one and press delete because I want us to work with this object right here. So this is the object we created, and this is the object in the view. Alright, so what we just did, we created this rectangle shape and we specified some dimensions for it. If we wanted to use this, for instance, on the arm, how do we know the circumference of this arm? Basically, if you want to measure, let's say, the width of this avatar's neck, or you have a client and you'd like to measure your client's neck and try to find out, what width of material or cloth you need to cut, you can't just keep, manually creating shapes and just editing them like that. You have to be precise and make your measurements. So how do we make measurements? And that's quite straightforward. We actually use the measurement tool. So here over on the 3D view, if we look at the top row by the right, you'll actually notice these two tapes. So here's the edit measurement tool for the avatar and the surface circumference measure for the avatar, and here we're going to have the edit measure for the garment and then the linear measure for the garment. So these are for the avatars, and this is what you use. So let's go ahead and click the edit measure for the avatar, and this is going to change this menu right here. And if we go over here to the edit measure, what we can do is to just see this. So this is going to be highlighted blue. Let me just try and zoom into this width of this arm, and it's going to be highlighted blue. If I click on that, we can actually see it's telling us the dimension right here. So this is about 8.25 inches. So let me just go ahead and go back to that tool, and let's go ahead and just zoom in. And if I click on this length here, it's 8.48. So I can just say an 8.5 inches. So that's the size of this shape right here. So it's 8.5 inches. We can even see that for the wrist. And say we want to measure this for the wrist. If I click on this, so the wrist is 5.45. Let me just go ahead and click that again. So it's 5.5 inches. So that's 5.56. So we can just do a 5.6 inches, or you can just make it 6 inches to give that extra, allowance if you're trying to create a garment that has that width. So with that in mind, you can actually try and see how you can create a circumference. So again, another tool you can use is the circumference measure for the avatar. So I'll just click on that, and I'll just click on the basic circumference measure, the first one. And basically what this is going to do is to measure the area around the shape. So a circumference is the area around the shape. In case you skipped your primary school mathematics, that's what this was for. You're going to use the software one day in the future, and you need to know what a circumference is. So I believe it's the region or area around the shape. So if I drag this and kind of like rotate this, and I click another point, and you can actually see it's drawing a circumference around this. It's actually going through this entire shape. So basically it's about 8.85 inches. And basically the other time we clicked on the circumference tool, I'll just click on I press escape to deselect that. If we go back to our edit measure tool and we just click on this right here, we are going to select this. Let me just go ahead here and click on this line. It's kind of like difficult sometimes to select the line. Oops, I think I zoomed in too much here, and click on that. That's 8.45. So basically if we just wanted to have precise measurement, we can use that basic circumference measure. We just click, drag and release, and it's going to try and measure the circumference around a specified path we've created. So let me just go ahead and select this and kind of like zoom in a bit and kind of like just rotate that and kind of click here. And so we could just click 2 points and we can have the circumference around an area. So that's how you can do that. We can always go back to the select tool, so here, or you can just press Q if you're on any of these menus, and that's how you can take a precise and accurate measurement. You can do things like measure the neck, and it actually takes a little bit of practice. So we can actually just go here, click this point, and also click this point and just drag. And now it's giving us the dimension. The neck is about 11.4 inches. I just pressed escape, and if we go back to the basic measure for the avatar, if I like I said, this is kind of like tricky. So if I select this, so the neck is 11.50 inches for this avatar. So if you actually measure the neck of your friend in real life and their neck is about 14 inches, you actually know what kind of material you're going to create that will have that circumference of 14 inches when you kind of like fold this, right? So that's how you kind of like do that. So we can go ahead and set this back by clicking back on our select tool or our move tool. And one cool thing you'll actually notice is that if we are on the 3D view, and this is our move tool, and if we are on the 2D view, this is our transform pattern tool. Basically these two tools do the same thing, right? So if we're over here, we can actually see we've selected this object, and if we're over here, because we have our transform pattern tool, it does the same thing. And when we select this, you can actually see these two. Now when we put in this plane shape, you can actually see something weird going on here. If this is our view, you might actually need to kind of like rotate this object to see where things are, so that you can actually be in the appropriate view. So here I'm just pressing 5, and I can now start moving this object just to align it around the arm, because I want to create some just basic nice fabric around the arm. So I can do that by moving these 3 axes. So like I explained, the y-axis is the height axis, basically the up and down axis. So if I click on the y-axis and drag this, we can drag the object up and down. The red axis is the x-axis, basically is the axis that moves things left and right. So I can just move this left and right like so. And then the z-axis is the axis that looks it's like pulling and pushing towards you. So if I hold the z-axis, if I kind of like rotate the character like this, now we can't really see that, but if we have that z-axis, we can actually use that to push and pull through. But there's something weird going on about this orientation of this tool right here. It's kind of like looking weird right now, and to fix that, we just need to go to the gizmo settings and change the gizmo settings to our world coordinate settings. And to have access to the gizmos, let's go to preferences and let's click on gizmo. Let's try local coordinate. Now the local coordinate is super awesome because, like I explained, we can actually see the z-axis is telling us that, hey, if we click on this, we can move this towards me and you. So basically, if this avatar is facing us, it means this z-axis is going to be moving towards the front like so. So here, this is it moving to this axis. So let's set this and let's press 5 to see the top alignment. So I'm just going to make sure we're selecting this axis, and this is actually going to rotate this. I don't want to rotate it, so I'll just undo that change just to have this object like so. And what I'm trying to do is to click on it, and we can click on the rotation. So here on this axis we have 3 coordinates here, and we can rotate this object based on this axis. So I'll click this side and kind of like rotate the x-axis, and I'll grab this just to turn on using the right mouse button and just zoom in. And what I want to do is to just move this towards Z like so, and we just keep looking at this and moving it like so. And the next thing I'm going to do is just turn it down and then grab the y-axis and drag this down like so. And I'll grab the z-axis rotation to rotate the object, and we could just move this like so. And we can also go back to the gizmos, and let's try world coordinates or gizmo and try screen coordinates. And if we go over here, we can select the entire length. When the cursor becomes a cross, you can select the entire length of the object so that you can use that to place this object in this position. Alright, so now that we've placed this object precisely where we want it, we can press the simulate, and this object is going to fall, and because it's using physics, it's going to fall off the hands of our character, because our avatar is kind of like our avatar has the hands of the avatar is slightly sloped, so it's not going to stand there, it's actually going to kind of like fall off. So that's one cool thing about that. So we just undo that and see how we can work with that. So you can have an avatar that has some slight poses, and meanwhile that arm is going to be stretched. So now moving this object could actually get challenging sometimes. And basically, say for instance we wanted to wrap this around the leg of our avatar right here. There are useful tools we can use to take advantage of this avatar, and that's going to be the arrangement points. So basically you could have a flat 2D shape like this, and then we can arrange that around this object. So let's go ahead and click this to select it, and I'll just quickly set the gizmo to local coordinates, and I'll just select this and kind of like drag it like so, and I'll just zoom in. And basically what I want to do is to make this rectangular shape wrap around the leg of our object, the character. And I'll just switch this over to the side view. Don't forget our keyboard shortcuts for the front and side view. Sometimes the gizmo can be tricky, so I'll just set this back to screen coordinates so I know which of the axes I'm selecting. And I'll just drag this slightly up on the y-axis, which is the height axis, and I have this just where I want it because I want to wrap this around our character's leg. Let's just go up a bit. Now we're going inside. Don't worry about that, we'll just drag this here. So world coordinates makes it easier to make a selection around the object, but if you want to have your precise settings, you can switch over to local, and this will give you a much more localized or average view on this object. So like I said, there's an arrangement point, and we can easily use that arrangement point to arrange this cylindrical shape around the leg of our avatar. So over here on the left view of our avatar window, there are some tools that are built in to take advantage of things like making selections or showing points on an avatar. If we go over here and click over right here on the avatar display, we have the show avatar, and here we have the show arrangement points. And basically we can actually see bounding volumes, x-ray joints, avatar measures, and 3D pen. Let's click on the show arrangement points, and basically it is going to show you some points where you could make some arrangements on the avatar like so. So this is an arrangement point, and we can use this object, this piece of fabric we created, and try and make this arrangement on one of these points we have right here. Right, so sometimes it might not suit your needs, but we just have something to work with, and when you make that arrangement you can always change that. Alright, now to use it, all we need to do is to select any of these points, and it will actually give you an idea of how it's going to look like when it's wrapped around this avatar. So for instance, if we select this point, so let's find a nice point and just see how that's going to look like. So if I select the foot right here, it's going to wrap it around like this. And let's just go ahead and select this arm. And you can actually see it's wrapped this around our arm. And then that shows us that we have actually made a very poor decision on trying to wrap around this object, because we need to measure the objects properly, and then you can actually see where it is. So you can play around with this. You can find any point you want. I'll just put this on the car avatar's right arm, and let's just move on from there. So now that we're satisfied with where we want to place this, let's go ahead and hide these selection points like so. So we just go over here and click that again, and the shortcut tool is Shift F, but just know that it's actually around this menu. So what we're going to do is to just do a simple sewing, and basically what we want to do is to close out this edge right here. We want to sew this edge and sew this edge right here so that we can actually have this object kind of joining these two edges together. And to do that, we can also go over to the let's try segment sewing tool, and basically I'll click on this starting segment here, and I'll click on this, and I'll kind of like try to move it over here to the next edge and click on that. And if we press space bar, you actually see we've sewn that, and it's going to fall off to the ground because again it's not really sitting down on this avatar properly, and it's simulating using gravity. So I'll just go ahead and undo that, and let's see how we can actually change this. So here what we should do is to kind of like edit the dimensions of this object so that it will be closer to our avatar's skin like so. Now once we can edit the dimensions of this object we've already created, then what we can do next is to kind of like sew these edges together. And to do that, let's just look for the diameter and then reduce that and see how we can kind of like bring this closer to the skin. So what we're going to do is to edit our shape right here, because I want it to kind of like fit this arm, and then we run the simulation and then sew this edge. Basically a simple stitch that is going to join this edge to this edge. So first in our 2D view, let's go ahead and click on our edit pattern, and let's select these this top here, and we could just drag that slightly to the left. I'll just drag it over to this point. And let's do the same with the bottom edge here, or bottom point, and I'll just drag that to over here. And basically what I'm trying to do is to just reduce the size of this. This is a crude way to do it, so but it's just to get results faster and show you how we can do this. So now that we have that, let's just test this and see if this is going to kind of like work. So with that, what we're going to do is to go over to the second row with the segment sewing, and let's click on the segments. And what we're going to do is to select either from here. So I'm going to select this segment, and I want to sew it to this segment like so. And basically now that we have that, let's just try and run a simulation for this. I'll press spacebar. It's actually sewn that, and we can actually see this has sewn this object on the character's arm. And basically that's a very simple way of adding geometry and then kind of like sewing the geometry on the object. We can pinch this, we can move it around just to see how this object is going to kind of like look like. Just pinch that and move these edges just to see that in action like so. So that's a very crude way. Like I said, they're very accurate methods. We can measure the circumference of the arm, and then with the circumference we know the length of material we can create, and then we can create our shape tool such that we can use that to cut and sew the object. So I don't want this to be super long because that's very long, but I kind of like created this to show you how you could, loading the avatar. We looked at the interface. We saw how we could create and run a simulation. We saw how we could, work with our history states. We saw a brief overview of the library. We saw how we could load in an avatar. We saw how we could like, kind of like measure things on our avatar. We saw how we could, bring out selection points. We saw some tips and tricks on the user settings and the interface. And basically, if it's your first day using CLO 3D, like I said, it's going to look overwhelming. But, with practice, with use, you'd actually get better at, using the program, and you'll be able to, kind of like learn from experience. So just play around with the tool, get familiar with the interface. You can join the online community, you can ask questions, and if you have anything you'd like to see, just let me know. So hopefully this has helped you understand what the software can do on the surface. We haven't scratched the surface yet. We haven't looked at all the tools yet. So yeah, I'll just exit right now, and in the next set of tutorials I'm planning to do, we're going to focus more on specific sections. But the key and core section of CLO 3D is to be able to measure a fabric, measure someone, or measure data from an avatar, and then use that data inside and then use it to create seams, to stitch, to sew, to cut, to weld, and to join. So basically your edit section here is going to take care of that. So most of the work you find out you'll be using most of these tools right here, and when you're done and you want to like showcase and add materials, you're going to be using this view. So thank you very much guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next CLO 3 quick tip.